But along with Hegel, Heidegger believes that this fear of falling into error is error itself. So he does something very odd for a philosopher. He begins by beginning. In other words, he starts writing, and I think that's very nice. He doesn't begin with a series of methods that will give us the single and correct interpretation of the self, which is sort of an obsession that I think only philosophers really have. And I don't want to, I mean, hell, it's what I used to do for a living, so I shouldn't rag on it too much, but it's a kind of obsession. I mean, it's an obsession with being right all the time. And one nice thing about Heidegger's account is that what he offers us is what he calls a hermeneutic of Dasein, and now I'll use the English equivalent, which means something like a story or a narrative of the self, a kind of story about the self. Now, the nice thing about a story as opposed to a method is that you don't approach them the same way. You don't, for example, about someone's life story, if it is powerful, interesting, and it grabs you and you can find meaning in it, it's not the best question to ask about a narrative, is it true or false? That's the best question to ask about an argument. But believe me, I'm from Texas, and when you hear a good story, you don't go, is that true? Because that takes all the fun out of it. I mean, the story that Heidegger has to tell has a lot of the power in it. Well, Heidegger is, and again, I'm going to try to summarize Being and Time here now in about 30 minutes. In Being and Time, Heidegger wants to look at what the self is in its structure as a being that lives through a period of time, and a being as opposed to being. Because one of Heidegger's central points is one that I've already been through in terms of the masters of suspicion. Classically in philosophy, there was a distinction drawn between being with a capital B, which is a philosophical way of writing the word God, or fundamental entity. Being, big B. And beings, entities, like one among which is Dasein. Heidegger, however, and I don't want to mislead you here because many readers have been misled, is no humanist. Heidegger looks around for what entity, what being would be the best being to interrogate on the issue of Dasein, on human being in the world. So the being that he chooses to interrogate turns out to be a sort of obvious selection. He wants to interrogate or interpret that being that raises the question of being. And that happens to be us. We do that. Salamanders don't go, what does it all mean? Why should there be something rather than nothing? What am I about? So instead of investigating salamanders, newts, or analytic philosophers, he tries to investigate human beings. I think that's a good, that's sort of a reasonable place to start. His account is fascinating. And I can advise you to read it. I'm going to try to go through it very quickly. You take the threefold structure of Dasein, won't surprise any of you, and it's not particularly profound. The threefold structure of the self in time is that you have a past, and a present, and a future. That is but when I've said this, I've made a structural remark. You follow me? That's the structure, the temporal structure of how we tell our lives. We tell about our past, our present, and about our plans, and so on. For Heidegger, it is care, and this is the early Heidegger. I won't go into what he thought later, but for the early Heidegger, it is the word care, and many of you will like this word, care. Concern is another word that could be used here. The German is Sorge, S-O-R-G-E. Care is what Heidegger interprets as what is fundamental to the being of Dasein. So for example, or the self. So for example, if you want to know what was interesting to a culture, what they cared about, I'll use my example. I got the chance to go to Florence, Italy, okay? It's a great place to get a chance to go to. I got to see Florence. And you can see how powerful his interpretation is when you visit a place like that, because you can see what it is that those selves, those designs, cared about by what they built. You go, wow, they didn't care that their malls aren't still open. You know? They don't care that the Ponte Vecchio is now run, you know, the Arno is all green and mucky and the Ponte Vecchio is just a little gold shop. They don't care. I mean, they've got the Uffizi, they've got the David, that's what they care about. That shows their care, their concern, the structure of their being, and so on. And you can and this is not a bad interpretation of human beings in the world. You can look at what people construct, what they build, what they make, what they cherish. And this is supposed to be, and I think it's not an unreasonable interpretation of human being. In terms of the past, care reveals something that you all already know. By the time that you showed up here today, you were already a being in the world. It's an interesting structural feature of all of you. You were, you know, barring the possibility, which we will reach by the time these lectures are over, that at least some of you are replicants, cyborgs. That's possible. I mean, it's even, I think, technically possible. But in any case, barring that last little note of suspicion, the human structure as uncovered by Heidegger is care, and in terms of the past, it shows that we are beings already in the world, which means that the philosophical project of starting without prejudices, starting without biases, starting without interpretations, would be as stupid as to have someone start speaking Shakespeare without having a language. In a way, the deep and powerful blow that Heidegger lays against philosophy is as a discipline that can start from scratch and tell us who we are, that can just start with a clean slate and build it up. No, the way we experience our lives is we wake up and, hell, we're already here. We are, in his phrase, thrown into the world. You were born somewhere, some when, some race, some class, some gender, and all of that already comes along, and from the minute you begin to speak a language and learn a culture, and learning a culture, contrary to what analytic philosophers say, is not like learning to pick out patches of blue or being sure that this is your hand. Learning a culture, to live in it, is more like learning how to dance the Virginia reel than it is learning how to pick out patches of blue. It involves many complex steps before you're in one. And I mean, even in a crude and vicious culture like West Texas, that's true, the one I come from. I mean, there's a lot of subtle little machismo rituals that if you don't know, they will beat you to death. You just have to learn them. They're complex. They're much more complex than the standard philosophical examples, which are picking out patches of blues and so on. So Heidegger says in the terms of the past, we're already in a world. In terms of the present, care reveals us as trying to be at home in the world. See, you may notice this sort of homey language of Heidegger's. The fact that he turns out to be a fascist, this has made me to this day wary of language that's overly homey. Sort of. That's why I don't like Grand Canyon. It's too homey as a movie. But anyway, care reveals us that being at home among, or being among, or trying to feel that you're in the right place, you know, that you belong in a place. In terms of the future, we are always, according to Heidegger, ahead of ourselves.